Well, Emmanuel Macron has no doubt been watching the political developments from the G7 summit in Italy. The leaders of the world's wealthiest nations are gathering in southern Italy for their annual three-day summit hosted by Italy's hard-right Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. The leaders were joined this Friday by Pope Francis, who addressed concerns about artificial intelligence. After a first day dominated by Ukraine with the announcement of providing billions in aid using income from Russian assets, the focus has turned to immigration and tension with China. For more, I'm joined on set by our international affairs editor, Kethevane Gorjestani. Kethevane, walk us through what we've been hearing from G7 leaders when it comes to China.
Well, there's definitely a hardened tone of the G7 leaders when it comes to China. And there are basically three main points on which they've hardened their tone, according to the draft final statement that has been circulating. So it looks like there are three elements. One, of course, is the targeting of this unfair trade practices that they accuse China of doing. They're saying that they want a level playing field when it comes to global trade. And the Americans, a senior administration official, really underscoring an unprecedented unity between G7 leaders when it comes to dealing with China, basically welcoming the fact that even European leaders are now on the same page as the Americans when it comes to dealing with China's unfair trade practices. The second aspect of that is the fact that they're calling on China to stop helping Russia's war efforts, stop selling it components for weapons, things like that. And that will be, it is expected, in the final statement. Yesterday, Joe Biden, in that press conference with Vladimir Zelensky, actually going full out against China on that, saying China may not be supplying weapons, but the ability to produce those weapons and the technology available to do it. So it is, in fact, helping Russia. That was the tone there. And finally, the third aspect, which hasn't been much talked about, but is likely to be in that final statement, is the G7 leaders expressing concern about the intimidation activities of China in the South China Sea, which is, of course, very important both for the French and for the Americans when it comes to the Indo-Pacific and, of course, to the Japanese. And so when you look at this, you sort of wonder, and that was a question to one U.S. administration official on whether this was an anti-China G7 summit. And of course, the Americans dismissed that, saying that, no, it was not about harming China. It was simply about getting China to play with the same international rules as everybody else.
Interesting to see how China will respond to all of that. So, Kethevane, consensus about China in the final statement from the G7 likely, but there has been some disagreement over another topic, abortion. Tell us about that.
Yes, it's pretty much the biggest point of contention, at least publicly, because it's really spilled over in broad daylight, if you will. The final draft statement is expected to drop any explicit reference to the word abortion or abortion rights. Instead, it simply reiterates a commitment to universal access to adequate, affordable, and quality health services for women, including comprehensive and reproductive health and rights for all. Now, reportedly, this has been dropped because of pressure from Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, despite pushback, especially from the French and from the Americans. For Meloni, she's simply saying, we don't need to talk about abortion rights directly in that statement because it references last year's a commitment in Hiroshima in 2023 that did specifically talk about safe and legal access to abortion. But she has been publicly criticized by Emmanuel Macron, who said he regretted it, that it was not going to be in the final statement, saying that it had different sensitivities on abortion. The U.S. also wanting that there, and Giorgia Meloni saying that they're basically campaigning and that it shouldn't be about the G7 and that politics should not play a role. But she also is playing domestic politics because this is, of course, something that is important to her domestically to sort of be seen as not necessarily a pro-abortion and rather anti-abortion.